welcome everybody for joining us today for the final installment of the Capturing Community Digital Storytelling and Community Driven Archives lecture series that we've been doing. I was very lucky to be able to lure all of our wonderful experts back today for a panel discussion where we can discuss the work that they've been doing, how they've kind of where it's led them, what they're kind of excited about, and really what would be really fantastic to come out of this lecture series here at Western is that there's an interest and drive to start doing similar projects like this in our community. And we have all these wonderful experts here that we can tap into. So first, I will just do a quick introduction. First, I'd like to introduce Nancy Godoy. She is the head of archives at Arizona State University. And she joined us the beginning of the series to talk about her work with community-driven archives and centering BIPOC and LGBTQ voices and experience in these archives. And we also are joined by Heather Charay and Todd Lawrence. They are co-directors of the Urban Art Mapping Project. They are at the University of St. Thomas in Minneapolis. And when they were here to join us, they talked about their work in capturing street art and kind of the evolving nature of graffiti and street art in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder and protests in Minneapolis. And finally, last but not least, my colleague, Dr. Lisa Perkins, is joining us today to talk about her work with the Dream of Detroit project, where she has been working on a multitude of projects with them, but she's been doing a oral history project capturing the oral histories and history of the community elders with young ethnographers, students really in the community. So thank you everybody for joining us. I figured maybe the first thing we could do is if folks, and I will be, I'll just say I'm going to be monitoring the chat. So any questions that come up, please, everybody, just chime in. But maybe we could start by, we could talk, maybe if people wanted to talk a little bit about their projects and yeah, I think that might be, we'll recap to get everybody up to speed. That would be a great place to start. Thank you. Nancy, would you like to start as our, we'll go in chronological order.
Okay, sure, no problem. Can you hear me? Okay, awesome. So I have been at ASU, Arizona State University, for about 10 years this January. And I'm an associate archivist of the Chicano Research Collection, which is the largest Latino collection in the state of Arizona. And over the last 10 years, I've kind of become the unofficial archivist of marginalized communities. In 2017, I received a Mellon grant or a grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to start our community-driven archives initiative. It was a dream of mine to come up with this back when I was a grad student, actually. And if we do have any students here, like I just encourage you to dream big. And the resources are out there. It's really hard to get them, but if you want to talk about it, definitely reach out to me afterwards. I can give you some more advice. And so the grant basically it ended this July. We got an extension because of COVID. And basically we've been working with community to create community archivists. So we're decentering the whiteness in the profession, which has led to communities, BIPOC and queer communities being excluded from local Arizona archives. These communities only represent 0 to 2% of known archival collections in the state. So there's a lot of work that we've been having to do the last 4 years specifically, and we've been coming up with um, resources for communities to become, or feel empowered to do this work themselves. We don't require anyone to donate to ASU. It's all about outreach and just creating a circle of knowledge where we share our knowledge as professional archivists, and we actually center their knowledge as community members. And, especially with indigenous communities here in Arizona, they're their original memory keepers. And, our profession or just, traditional white institutions don't recognize that often. So yeah, that's just a quick summary. I could talk like I did an hour before, but thank you for the invitation to talk today.
Yeah. Todd and Heather, maybe you just wanted to, yeah, give a little brief rundown of your work too.
Sure. You want me to start, Heather?
Sure, that's great. Thanks.
So Heather and I are co-faculty directors of the Urban Art Mapping Project at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota, and we work with one other faculty member, Paul Laura, who's a geographer, and we have a pretty large. Well, I don't know. It's always a fluctuating team of students. We have high school interns all the way up to grad interns and graduate students. And so we usually have a team of about 7 or 8, something like that, who work with us. And we originally started this project over 3 years ago now. And we were documenting and mapping street art in a particular neighborhood of St. Paul. And we wanted to sort of think about and find out how street art impacted people in particular neighborhoods. And so we were doing the documenting and mapping. We were also doing interviews, ethnographic interviews with community members and artists and other stakeholders. And we did that for a couple of years. We moved into some different neighborhoods. We were sort of looking at like how the art sort of expresses anxieties over particular kinds of pressures in a changing neighborhood or a transforming neighborhood. And then, of course, George Floyd was murdered right here in the Twin Cities in May of last year. And so we saw this proliferation of art all over the city and across the nation, really. We always say that we think it's the sort of biggest, maybe the biggest proliferation of street art around one incident and maybe in the history of the world. And so we saw that there was all this art. There were, boards went up over windows and that sort of thing. And so we wanted to, do something to preserve some of the art that we knew would get buffed or painted over or taken down really quickly. There was a lot of attention that was paid to, the more aesthetically pleasing stuff, the more politically acceptable, I guess, stuff. And so we think that the stuff that's politically oppositional and the stuff that is, just what people think of as just graffiti, we think that's important too. And so we wanted to, try to figure out a way that we could preserve that. And the only way we could do it at the time, of course, COVID was happening and we're in a lockdown and we can't be all over the city, certainly not all over the country, was to do it crowdsourced. And so it's a crowdsourced project that relies upon the community to submit images of art to us, and then we put it in the database, and people give us as much metadata as they can, and we fill in what we can find if they don't have it. And so we have the art on a map, and then we have the art available for people to access. Everybody can access. It's publicly available. So Heather, you want to add anything?
I'll just add that we're not at all professional archivists, and we're accidental archivists. I mean, the reason why I think this project came about was because of COVID and because we couldn't go out and use our usual method of documenting things. And so an archive seemed like the reasonable way to do that. And there are lots of things about the project that are so important to us now, like community-based archiving and really destabilizing the authority of the archive and centering BIPOC voices in the archive. that have developed along the way, but we didn't come to this project with the knowledge that that's how we wanted to approach it. So I think it was a little, I don't want to say it was the wrong order. It's just how it happened. But we're still always evolving and trying to learn more about archives and thinking about how we're doing our project. And I hope we'll continue to refine it as we go forward in the future.
Thank you. Lisa, did you want to talk a little bit about your work too?
Absolutely. So as I discussed the last week's presentation, when Mark Crane was with me, the executive director of Dream of Detroit last time, and he regrets that he couldn't come this time, but he started us off last time. And so I'll try to capture some of, his comments as well as my own. So I'm involved in a project called either the Detroit Muslim Storytelling Project or the Dream Storytelling Project. It goes by both names. And I began my work on this project in 2019 when the executive director of an organization called Dream of Detroit, that was Mark Crane, approached me and asked me to help him prepare a grant to fund an oral history initiative. So Dream of Detroit is a neighborhood revitalization organization. It's a Muslim-led organization. We could say an inner city African-American Muslim-led organization in West Detroit. And its purpose is to revitalize, renew, and create a really healthy community in a West Detroit neighborhood, which is anchored by a mosque, probably the largest mosque, the largest African-American mosque in Detroit that's been there since '85. There's also a very large stately church right across the street, an AME church. And there's also some organizations like a free clinic and community garden and other initiatives that have sprung up, in between these organizations. And Dream of Detroit was established in 2013. And Mark Crane and his wife Hazel moved from Chicago to lead the initiative and live in the neighborhood. And so among the many different activities that Dream of Detroit does is public engagement and is, creating, building knowledge and creating representation, even though their mainstay is housing development and community formation. So he was applying for several years, trying to formulate this project that would be really, in essence, a community-based participatory research project, which would center, the collection of knowledge about African-American Muslim history, would center that in the hands of people, from within that community. And so I've been doing ethnographic research in Detroit on Muslim American civic engagement since 2007. So I had been involved with Dream of Detroit's activities somewhat, but I had always asked for if there was never an opportunity for me to help out. And so we worked on this grant together and secured this very small seed grant. And were able to start a project in 2020, during the pandemic. And I guess what we've managed to do so far is actually collect 50 video recorded oral history interviews, with each interview being carried out and formulated by a young community-based ethnographer who's a member of the African-American Muslim community. And so far we've managed to put 30 of these up on our archive with the help of Amy, who's, the Western Michigan University Digital Humanities librarian and expert who helped us do that. The other things, our other outputs besides the archive is, and we got another fund from small fund from the Whitting Foundation seed grant. And so what we're trying to do is, we're putting together this archive. And then the next step would be taking little pieces of these long form interviews and putting them on a website in a more digestible way, and using people from within the community working alongside of them and using their expertise and direction to formulate a website. And then another output is a documentary film that we're working on, which is, if the two other outputs so far are trying to basically tell the history of African-American Muslim community building in Detroit over the generations, in a very wide, as wide as possible way, the documentary narrows in and really tells the story of Dream of Detroit, and what Dream of Detroit, how Dream of Detroit is advancing this very long tradition of African-American Muslim activism dating back since the 1930s, but what are they actually doing in that space and time? And so we have, you know, we've started that process as well, again, with community-based artists and filmmakers. And finally, we're partnering with a community members publication company, Book Power Press, to create essays, you know, from some of the oral history interviews in consultation with, in collaboration with the interviewers. And so far, we've involved about 50 different people in the project, whether they're community-based activists or community-based media experts or filmmakers or students, and then also university-based interns have also been able to contribute to the project. And so we're still, I believe, in our beginning phase, and really listening to the presentations and things that the other presenters in the series put on really helped me, think about future stages. So I'm really grateful to be part of this series and exposed to and in conversation with all of you.
So, one way I thought maybe we could start off. I was looking through the past archived events, and Nancy, I kept going back to the discussion you had. I'm not sure I will pronounce this the right way, but it was about archiving as kind of a healing process and building building a collective memory to heal historical trauma. So that was just that was something that I really took away from your presentation, and it would be great if maybe you wanted to talk about that a little bit more, and just kind of your thoughts behind that.
Sure. So I think you're referencing conocimiento, right? Which is a concept that was introduced by Gloria Anzaldúa, who is a queer feminist teacher icon. She's definitely one of my heroes. And her theory helped me create the community-driven archives initiative, right? Because I was creating something from, I was reimagining the archives through her work, right? What would be possible? What kind of spaces, safe spaces, sacred safe spaces we can build with community, right? And so I think we're trying to humanize ourselves and communities who are constantly attacked, right? Especially our Black and Indigenous communities and here in Arizona. And so I think, just creating those spaces where they have voice for the first time, where they have control for the first time is very important. And, there's a lot of trauma that, our profession, the archival profession, is 86% white as of 2015. That might have changed. But, our memory keepers, our professional memory keepers are white archivists who are not part of these communities, right? And so there's privilege and a lack of reflection that hasn't been done, and that communities are doing. And in order to heal, you need to reflect and acknowledge all these horrible things potentially that your communities have gone through, are going through. And just also reflect on generational trauma, right? You might be okay right now, but you have a legacy of trauma behind you. Here in Arizona, there's a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric, anti-black rhetoric as well. There was a Indian boarding schools that just closed in the 70s, 80s. There's constant there's, like I said, constant trauma, and we don't acknowledge that. And I think as a profession, as academia, and I think that further dehumanizes the communities that we're supposed to serve. And so my quick 2 cents, but I would love to hear what other people have to say.
I feel like I want to hear from our panelists, but I really feel like there is a kind of a common thread that I noticed was I feel like a healing aspect to the work that people are doing, and just an acknowledgement, and just listening to those voices and hearing them, which was something that really spoke to me throughout the work that we've been seeing.
I think we've found that a lot of artists talk about healing. They talk about making art as a form of healing. And I mean, whether they're graffiti artists or writers, or they're making large murals and working with the community, they often talk about that it's therapeutic, that it helps to heal, that it helps get these thoughts and these feelings up on the walls and out of their bodies. And so that's really a common theme that we see. And it's interesting because we also think about the archive as a kind of, well, we think about how does it operate as a way of healing? How does it help to heal? And it's really hard to quantify that, of course. But I think for us, we tend to think more about how the archive can keep these ideas alive, keep them in public memory, really keep them revitalized, and really keep the movement going. So I think that idea of using the archive as a kind of activism is really important to us. But it's an interesting question because I've grappled with that before. Like, does the archive play a role in healing? I'm not sure if our archive does or not, but certainly it's something artists talk about a lot with their work. Todd, do you have thoughts on that too?
Well, I was thinking the same thing that you were thinking, that our work is not necessarily to provide a space for people to create something or to collect something themselves or engage in a way that promotes healing, because we're coming along after they've already done something. But on the other hand, I think the opportunity that we provide for people to become documenters and archivists kind of themselves. I mean, we do interviewing of people who have been documenters for us, and they often say that the act of documenting and engaging with the art in this sort of new way or different way than they have in the past, which is something that artists seem to want, because they talk a lot about trying to activate space, right? Like trying to change or transform the way that any individual or group of people kind of see themselves or understand themselves or experience themselves in space. So like when someone goes and starts to document a lot of different pieces of art, they might find themselves listening to the message in a different way, that a way they never did before, because you slow down and you start to look. I mean, it's happened to me. And I'm not an art historian. I'm a folklorist, and so I recognize the power of vernacular expression and all of that. But I never looked at street art the way that I have since we started this work, and now can't not see it. And I always slow down, and I always think about what is this person trying to communicate? Who are they talking to? What's the conversation that's happening? And at the time when we started the databases, we were so isolated from each other because we were under lockdown. And I think for me, and also I'd seen a man get lynched on a video on television or wherever I saw it, and we had all seen that together, this super traumatic event, which was only another instance of that, even in this community where it happened over and over and over again. So there was a way that to highlight this art some way, or to engage with it in a new way, for me was healing. And I think we were doing one interview last summer where someone asked me, like, what does this work mean to you? And I had to stop and say, like, this work has helped to be able to like be in community with folks who are doing this work with us, has helped me probably more than it's helped them. I don't know. I mean, I can't say how much it's helped them, but I know it's helped me.
I just wanted to also say that conocimiento translates to knowledge. And so Gloria and Sadhguru thought that we all go through a journey, BIPOC, the queer community, we go through a journey in order to decolonize our minds and our bodies. And I totally see that when we do our events, even virtual, this last year because of COVID, we had to transition completely to virtual only events, right? And people were just wanting a space to talk, through Zoom, People were stuck at home, so people wanted to show their archives. They had all their photographs there at home. And so I think, it's the way we're doing this work. It's a safe space because communities are in control. We're not creating the safe space. It's the communities who are doing that very important and sacred work, of creating that space for themselves, and then the reflection that goes into that work, right? And to acknowledge things and be able to, you know, go through the journey, and then the last stage of that journey, Gloria Anzaldúa talks about spiritual activism, right? Which kind of moves people to do this important work and create solidarity and heal some of those wounds even within the BIPOC community, right? There's a lot of anti-Blackness, homophobia within our communities, and so how do we start creating the spaces where we can reflect and have those discussions, and again, not center whiteness, because that's always centered.
I would I'd like to share a reflection from both something that tied together both of the other presentations for me, and then ask a question to like each, to each group, or so the one thing that I kept hearing in the presentations was this will to decenter, and so like historically the archive or the museum is this place where you collect artifacts and you put them all in one place. It's a very acquisitive will, and there's something deathly about it. There's something like, this is over and this is now collected. We've kind of conquered it. These are the trophies in a way. And I think that some of like the healing, the integrity of the projects come from this wanting to bring together the theory and the method. So each of the projects are centered in like a very specific epistemology, right? Or a very specific theory. On one hand, you have Stuart Hall's vision of the living archive and all that entails for Stuart Hall. And then you have, of course, Gloria Anzaldúa's theories of, the love ethic and the conocimiento, and what that entails. And so I just wonder, like, so both of your archives, unlike mine, have some material cultural aspect to them. They're not just words. Sometimes they're photographs that are scanned, or they're art that's, the photograph. And I just wondered if you could talk about the tension between the centering and the decentering, like the fact that, each project does do some sort of like overarching, kind of, that does have some sort of top-down organization strategy, but then always in tension with, then let's let it go. Then let's not, be so acquisitive. Let's let it happen as it will and where it will. So could you talk a little bit about the tension and how it relates to the livingness and the love ethic?
It's a great question. I could start with that. I was actually just talking to someone about that today, because I was trying to sort of explain our archive and how it works. And I think this is something that we have wrestled with, because we wanted to always see this as, it is a community project because it relies upon community members. And then, of course, we have the ethnographic aspect and we try to sort of engage in a kind of collaborative, decentered kind of approach to ethnography as well. But as happens when you do ethnography, this similar thing happens when you're doing archiving, is that there's always a point where we make decisions about things. And in the case of the archive, for example, we have to decide on the boundaries of the archive. And we have to say, I remember Heather and I having a conversation at one point about whether or not chalk art on sidewalks should go in the archive. And we eventually decided no. But the reason we decided no was a question around risk, and also I think the sort of larger proliferation of chalk art, I guess. And when I think about that decision, although I don't sort of second guess it, I do think like, well, that's a super debatable reason. to not include chalk art, right? Um, but it was a decision we had to make because we can't archive everything, and other decisions that we make are really easy to make, right? So people submit, well, the people have submitted stuff to us that's racist, that's white supremacist, right? And of course, that does not jive with our archive in any way, shape, or form. But if there's a piece of George Floyd art and then there's a piece of racist art next to it, like that's part of the context that the art exists in. Or we have lots of images of anti-racist art that has been defaced by racist imagery or racist text or something like that. So do we put that in the archive or do we leave that out? Like what we have to make those decisions. And so that's where we're exerting, like some power and judgment over the archive. And it is not a completely, sort of living free thing in those moments, right? So I really, I think we struggle with that. There's a way that we want the archive to be. And there are lots of times when it's not that. And I think maybe the way that I've come to understand it and the nature of it is that if it's always changing, like there's one thing we can't stop it from doing is changing. And if we sort of try to facilitate that ongoing change, whether it's just people contributing more and more things, or whether it's us adding more and more things, or whether it's us asking people to contribute different kinds of things, to the archive, so I mean, I would love at some point where we weren't like in control of it anymore, where it was maybe there was community members who were deciding what goes in it and what doesn't go in it or something like that. And I guess we're not at that point yet because, the thing is we don't have a handle on it. And as Heather said, we're learning this as we go. We are accidental. You never used that term before, Heather, but I like that we're accidental archivists because we really are. We just found ourselves like, okay, we could do this. Once we had two pieces that someone sent to us, we're like, okay, I guess we have an archive. I guess we have to figure out how to do this, right?
And I think the other place where we impose some control over it is that we, early on with our student researchers, determined some themes that we would use to organize the archive. And so, I mean, that was really shaped by just, I think, the first 100 objects. We thought, well, what kinds of ideas are we seeing that are shaping all of this work? And so we came up with these themes, like tributes to George Floyd and, systemic critiques and kind of works that said last words and things like that. But it's really arbitrary because you might have a wall with multiple pieces of graffiti and they're saying different things and they could go in different categories. Or you might have a piece that's doing multiple things with just one piece. And so we end up having to make this arbitrary choice about where it fits, how it's categorized. But I guess we take some comfort in the fact that this platform we're using, Omeka, I mean, everything can change. We have had to add new categories along the way. For example, at one point, anything that was anti-police, anti-cop imagery, we were putting together in this category that was called systemic critiques or something like that, I think. And then we realized that category was just doing too much. It was doing a lot, and there was so much explicit anti-cop imagery that was important to sort out that we had to start another category for that. And then we've grappled a little bit with how do we organize things that are at George Floyd Square, because that's been a site of transformation and constant transition over the past year and several months. And so originally a lot of those objects were just sorted into different categories, and then we decided to put them all together in one George Floyd Square category. But it's really difficult to figure out, well, how will people actually live with this archive and really use it as they're trying to make sense of the world around them. So it's not perfect at all, far from it.
Oops. I just wanted to quickly say that you're both community archivists in my eyes, because you're building something. So call yourselves community archivists, or not unofficial archivists. You're community archivists. I use two buzzwords that are just kind of like trigger a lot of like good emotions, I think, for me, love and living, right? Love ethic and living. You know, I think what's kept me in academia as a queer woman of color is love for my communities that I belong to, love for people who are constantly dehumanized, right? That's what keeps me here, wanting to use my privilege to create change, right? And I also see that love within community, right? We're building something together collectively. And I think also, you know, if you go to any academic institution that does have, or even just any historical society across the country, if you go to these institutions, you ask about any BIPOC or queer collections, more than likely these collections were started by people from those communities, right? And so, we need to talk about, and I've started to feel more comfortable doing this. In the past, I haven't felt comfortable doing this, but specifically pointing out that sometimes we serve as the moral compass of our institutions, right? We're telling them, hey, we should be doing this. Hey, this is wrong. And sometimes that leads to harassment. That leads to people trying to retaliate against us because we're trying to point out, you know, the injustice and the erasure. And so that puts, a target on you. And, you know, uh, I think going back to the living part, right? I think that's why people have been able to do, like, when I say people, I mean like when people have colonized certain communities, right? Not just in the United States, across the world. One of the first things that people go after is memory, right? And destroying archives and destroying museums. And so, I think our 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 field, or just in general, white institutions have used memory as a weapon for sure. And so how do we, I try to tell our community archivists, like, you are a living archive, right? You carry not only your history, but you carry the history of several generations. That should be preserved the way you want it to be preserved. And how can we help you? And that seems so simple to me, but for our profession and for academia, we're gatekeepers, right? We want everything. We want to put it in our archive, close the doors, let stuff get dusty, sometimes bring it out when we want to do token outreach events, right? To speak very honestly. Um, and then what happens after that? It becomes a dormant archive again, right? Passive. We don't do anything. And so I I wanted to give those quick thoughts, but I think that there's a longer discussion that needs to happen, and there needs to be more BIPOC and queer leadership within our profession and also within academia if we're really going to create change, and not just have it be like a fancy equity, diversity, and inclusion project, right? This is like the beginning of long-term change.
So we have a question from the audience, and thank you everybody for sharing your thoughts on that. And this is kind of a perfect segue because I know that students have really played a large part in the work that you've all done and in different regards. So Quincy asks, what are some steps that could be taken either by students or the general public to move the archives into a more public sphere? Is there anything we can do to help? So, would anybody like to, I can share my thoughts first to start off. Quincy, if I'm not mistaken, you were in a class that we worked on a digital humanities project together. What I really hope comes out of these, yes, I'm glad to see you here, Quincy. I'm just following the chat. What I really hope comes out of these talks today, and getting to see these successful collaborations and projects, it's that we're getting the conversation started here on campus, that we can build a community of practice, and we can work together. We're all coming from different points of view, different areas of expertise to kind of do the work both on our own campus or beyond in the community. And I think being at a place like the Center for the Humanities, where it's really kind of a melting pot of folks that have all different disciplines and expertise and identities. I hope that we are, by talking about how folks are capturing community, that we can start to create community right here on campus and, do some of this kind of important work.
So my thoughts about how students could help, the efforts of, the methods that were advance them is, wouldn't it be wonderful if when students were writing papers for their classes that they insisted on using, archival material rather than just published books, And so if you could sort of tip off, you being aware of this, if you could tip off other students that there's all these other sources of knowledge, And I think people are aware now because of, when I was in college, when I was an undergraduate, you had to go to the library and get books still. But now, of course, people use the internet and they use blogs and there's there's different borders. But I don't know if public or digital archives have broken through that kind of, public awareness. And so I think that would be really wonderful that students could use those materials. And even though sometimes they might be harder in some ways because it's not all you have to dig through, you have to roll up your sleeves and dig through. And I think when you use an archive, a really important thing to do is to create an inventory or create a trail of what you've done. And then you could sort of help the archivists understand how it was used and your path through it. And that would be really valuable information, to put in a paper as well, because you going through the archive, you are becoming, kind of an ethnographer as well, it's not all digested for you. And so I think it would be really wonderful if students started, understanding and spreading the word about this kind of resource.
Yeah, I would like to agree with that. Those are really great comments. And for us, I think the same thing applies. And I want everyone to know that our database is free for anyone to use. So any student anywhere, any researcher anywhere can access our database and see everything that's in there. And we wanted it to be that way. In fact, we've made it's sort of less secure than it should be, I suppose, because we wanted to err on the side of it being available for people to use. So we have a lot of language in the database, that tries to set parameters for how people would engage with the images. So we don't want it to just be a place where people go and take images for, I don't know, whatever, social media or whatever, that we actually want it to be a meaningful engagement. But it's set up so people can do that if they want, so that everybody else can engage with the material without very many encumbrances. And I think also for our database and our projects in general, students can help us, everyone can help us by contributing. And I want to just emphasize that this is not a completed database, that we have a lot of images of art in our database, but there are hundreds of thousands of images out there on the street and being created every day that deal with the issues that our databases cover. So we have a COVID-19 database, and we have this George Floyd and anti-racist street art database. Any art that has to do with either of those two, you can contribute images to the database. And we don't care about, people often ask me, well, you probably have an image of this already. We don't care about duplicates. We want duplicates. We want photographs from different angles. If somebody said, hey, I'm going to contribute one photograph every day of this same piece for a year, I would love that. That would be amazing. So I want people who are documenting and contributing not to feel encumbered by us in some way, or what they think we might want, or what they think would be appropriate. Just send us stuff, and we'll sort through it and try to present it in the way that you might have wanted it to be presented. And then I think this all goes towards our continuing work in the future to engage with people who are using the database and people who are contributing to it and responding to what they would like to see, and more and more kind of ceding control to them so that they can be the owners and operators of the database. I mean, I guess there's always sort of a tension between protection, you know, and security and like letting everything be open. But we need to like ride that rail, you know, and try to be there right on the line as much as we possibly can be.
We're always talking about the idea that walls speak, but there's this communication that's happening all around us on walls and graffiti and street art. And I mean, I think that the archive itself plays a role, but we also really just want people to be out there hearing, like looking at those conversations and seeing them and documenting them. And people do all the time. They put graffiti and street art on social media, like on Instagram. So it's really just a way of taking something that people are already doing and bringing it together and organizing it in another way and making it more accessible for the future in another way. So that's part of what we're trying to do. So we definitely love to have contributions from people everywhere. And I think, I don't know, I mean, it just helps you see the world in a new way when you stop and take pictures of street art. And when you stop and you know that you're looking for this idea to be expressed in the street. So like Todd said, we have two collections of images right now, and we're working on one that's about sustainability and environmental issues. And I mean, there's just like no end to the number. Any kind of issue that you care about is probably addressed somewhere in street art. So there's so much that we can do with it in the future.
We have.
I just wanted
Oh,
Sorry, I was just gonna add that with our work, a lot of the people we initially engage with don't know what an archive is. And so I think if you're a community archivist and you want to share the importance of this work, you know, it would probably start with just explaining what an archive is. And then also, you know, with our student workers, all of my student workers graduated this May, and so I miss them so much, but I'm so glad that they're entering their different fields. But our student archivists, they, you know, they were helping us reimagine the archive, right? It's not just this traditional sense of an archive, right? It can be street art. It can be, you know, somebody wanted to do something on non-binary people and the archives. And so one of our student archivists did a virtual event focusing on that. We had something on cooking, even cooking, right? How does that go along with archives? So we're definitely like, I think the foundation of our work is creating those spaces where people can just explore different things that might mean something to them, that might be a part of their archive. And you know, I tell this to a lot of people that I engage with as community archivists. You probably have more knowledge and experience with local history than your local archivist does, professional archivist. And that sometimes blows people's mind, right? Because they're so used to being put down by society, being othered, right? And so the idea of saying, no, you're a community archivist, you just, you know, you don't have the resources that you need. And, you know, that's where we come in and we're like, you know, what do you need? Do you need to borrow a video camera? Do you need to borrow a laptop so you can scan some images? Do you need an archive starter kit? So we do give that out to community members, and everything, because of the Mellon grant, everything was for free. And now we're transitioning, our university is giving us permanent funding. So we're transitioning to an actual permanent initiative, which is really exciting. And I'm actually looking for a professional archivist. It's a tenure track position if anyone's interested. The job closes November 3rd. You can go to our ASU library website to check out the job, or if you know anyone else who might be. So we're expanding our team. And so we're going to continue. And again, it's about showing people our knowledge, but also listening to what knowledge that they might have and what they want an archive to be. Because if we don't listen as a profession, we're going to become obsolete. Nobody's going to care about archives, right? They're just going to stay traditionally white institutions, organizations that don't mean anything to local communities.
That's a really interesting point. I'm glad that you brought that up, where I feel like being in the information, kind of science and archives profession, it's, I feel like I'm a guest in projects and communities at time. And it's like, you have kind of the technical know-how, but it's like really the expertise lies, with the people, the history makers, those that are generating the content. So it's just, I feel like it's a really empowering way to think about that and engage with the communities that you work for, or are working with, rather, that it's just like positioning yourself as the resource that has some of the, that background how to, but like giving them the tools to really tell their story is so important.
I'd
So-
please.
Oh no, I was gonna read another question, but Alisa, if you have something to say, please do.
Just to segue on what Nancy was talking about in her Nancy, in your long presentation, you did talk about, giving out these archive kits, creating spaces, inviting people in, having these like very dynamic events. Like there was like a Black Love event. I think you talked about an event where people started like singing, where they brought an archive of like raise your voice. So I just wondered, but each presenter, each presentation talked about this tension, right, between the university and knowledge builders who are not traditionally represented in the university. And so, Nancy, you already just talked about some of the ways that those tensions were broken, like through or reconciled through offering resources and things like that. But can each group or talk about some more like nuts and bolts of mechanics of how those kind of initial contacts were made, and how it's possible to to have that kind of rapport and trust and safe space, even though the university is held, rightly so, as a very suspect, perhaps even a hostile place.
Well, we think about that question all the time, and I don't really know actually how to answer it. But I mean, I think we teach at a predominantly white institution, and there is a lot of suspicion in the community about our university. And so we're always trying to really think carefully about how we position ourselves. And we have actually, we've kind of done things not through university platforms, I guess. We've done things on a separate platform that's not really directly linked to the university. But it's a little bit of a tension that we haven't really thought about how to address. Well, we've thought about how to address it long term, but I don't know that we've come up with resolution about how to address that long term. But it's a tricky situation because we really want to care about and need to have these positive relationships in the community, and we need to do that with sincerity, and we need to do that in a way that's really sustained and that's enriching for the community and for us and for our student researchers. But I think, Amy, you mentioned this before, or maybe Nancy, you mentioned this, I'm not sure who said it, but the idea that these projects are often seen as just a positive thing for the university to talk about diversity and equity and inclusion. And, we're really all in with this project, and we want to commit to it long term, and we want this project to really make change. So there's always some tension there, and I don't know exactly how to resolve it.
Yeah, if I can just add quickly, like I really feel that tension between projects as something that the community owns, or that we're trying to sort of think of as community owned, community rooted, and then the university, and this is maybe not every university, but I actually think it is that projects become commodified, right? Like they become sources of donations, giving, right? Or they're something that we can use to show how great a university we are, or how we're paying attention to this particular issue. So, at our university, which is like currently sort of like really struggling with DEI issues, our project becomes like, hey, look what they're doing over there, right? And so we're like, whoa, hold on, like we that's not the way that we want our project to show up in the world as a kind of advertisement for something, right? So it's very it's a difficult and challenging tension to deal with, I think, but um I guess we have to sort of just like prioritize who we listen to. Like when they come and they start to say, we want to do this or we want to do that, and we go, well, hold on, we need to talk to our people, or we need to we don't want to do that because we know that our partners would not like that, wouldn't trust that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's always about like, in some ways the university is our master because for us we're funded internally by the university. So but the work we do, they have to understand it's not for them. They're going to take it and try to do what they can with it because that's what they do. But our intention is not to create something that benefits the university, but to create something that benefits the larger community.
I feel like that's something I've been kind of grappling with at times where there's this I feel like there's gatekeeping about archives and memories and objects where it just kind of commodifies everything. It's like you just want to possess something instead of thinking about it, how it's situated kind of in the larger picture, and how it's really for the community, where archives, they serve the important purpose of curating and caring for and safeguarding objects, but they aren't really ours to, they're not our possessions. They belong to the larger community. So it's just, I think, trying to find that right balance sometimes can be difficult, and especially I think if you're kind of a guest in a space where you want to be an ally, but also not kind of usurp this important story that is being told by these communities.
I just wanted to add that I think as BIPOC, tension is part of our lived experience, daily lived experience, right? So like it's been a part of my life the last, I'm 36, but especially the last 10 years working at ASU. And I'm sure it's going to be part of my life moving forward if I decide to stay at ASU, which I probably will, since I got tenure in 2017. So I'm not going anywhere. And I think, we do work for these institutions with a long legacy of white supremacy, right? And so I think I'm not building for the institution, I'm building for the community so that they can sustain their memory work, whatever it looks like, their archives, so they can sustain this outside of our institution. And I think when you're talking about real equity, diversity, and inclusion, or just justice, that's real justice, right? Is giving the community full control and saying, we're sorry for all the horrible things we've done, not just academic institutions, other white institutions around the world. We're sorry, we acknowledge everything we've done, and here are the resources. This is a way to give back for, and I think with a lot of white supremacy groups, they're angry because we're decentering them for once, and we're saying these people are also human beings and they deserve to have a memory and a voice. And that political climate is very, very, we live in a blue state now, but it's still very red, Arizona. And you see the legacy of white supremacy and how our communities have been dehumanized, right? And so nothing that I personally build is for the university. I'm very thankful I'm working at the university. I don't think I would be able to do what I'm doing and be this vocal at any other institution. But I'm hoping that we can be an example for other institutions who want to do this work in an ethical way that really empowers community members and doesn't just continue that same cycle. of taking advantage of communities, right? And then I also just wanted to say one more thing about white archivists, white researchers being included in this work, right? And you need to decenter yourself, right? And not be the focal point of the work, right? And I think that takes a lot, because you've always been centered, right? White people have always been centered. It's hard to decenter yourself, and there's a lot of feelings that come out of that, white, right? Like white fragility, feeling like you're a white victim, like, you know, you're being attacked, when in reality we're just trying to give other people the same thing, the same privilege and memory that you have, right? And so I think I've said this a few times, and I actually said it in the presentation. I'm not looking for white allies. I'm looking for white accomplices, right? We need to dismantle these power structures that keep our communities from having a voice and from having a memory. And I think if you are white and you want to do this work in a real ethical way that helps people, listen. And I think listening is such a, it seems so simple, but it is like really hard for people, especially in academia, to just listen, and see what the needs are of community members.
One of the things that really stuck with me, Nancy, during your presentation was you had I think maybe it was a student employee that was from an Indigenous community that, you know, the census or, you know, some sort of, you know, entity said, you know, this community doesn't exist. And, you know, she was able to, you know, gather information and, you know, just by being able to work with you and your initiative, it's like, you know, here it is, here's, you know, the proof this community exists. Here it is in this archive. And I just found that really, really powerful. So I can ask, we have another question, and this is from our colleague, Dr. Ann Miles. She says, this is a very rudimentary question, but how do you find these archives if you don't already know they exist? So it would be great to hear how, you know, the kind of, you know, outreach or, you know, how folks find you if they, you know, don't know to go straight to your website.
Sure. Well, for us, we have sort of two online databases, which are you can just search. Well, I'll give you the whole address, I guess. So there's georgefloyd.omeka.org. Is that right, Heather? Or is it .net?
I'll type it in the chat.
Okay, that would be good. But we also have a Instagram page and a Twitter feed. So Urban Art Mapping is our team name. So if you search Urban Art Mapping, or if you go to either of the databases, we have all of our you know, connect, or all of our information there where you can connect with us. And yeah, we're just trying to, like, yeah, build a larger kind of community of people who know about what we're doing, because the more people that know what we're doing, the better the archive will be. Yes, I'm relying on Heather to do what I could not actually do. You start.
I couldn't say the address in my head. That's why I had to type it. I can type it, but I can't say it out loud.
We're working on a different web page that will kind of like be a kind of portal into all of our materials. So we're trying to beef up our web presence right now.
Yeah, but we have a lot to learn, I guess, also about that, like how to get the news out, how to get the word out, because we do a lot of academic talks and talk in classrooms a lot and teach with the material a lot. So I think it's getting out in academic circles. And we do interviews with artists so they get to know about the work, or we have some social media presence, but we don't really have a systematic way to really promote our work. And I just think we're also not, I don't know, like we're not really trained to do that. But I think it is important to, especially for a crowdsourced archive like this, it's trying to be global, to really find ways to reach new audiences. And that's something for us to keep working on too.
Don't you think, Heather, that, I mean, it's basically for us is like talk to or partner with anyone. Like when people, we listen to anyone. We will do any talk. We will go to any event. You know, like everything we can do to, and it's, I think it's worked here in the Twin Cities because people know us now in the Twin Cities, largely because, you know, people got to know us last summer, artists that we were working with, you know, people that we were interviewing, and that sort of spread over this smallish kind of area. It
Right.
gets bigger when we're trying to go global, but it's sort of like one engage, you know, one interaction at a time. You met someone from Mozambique or whatever, and
Right.
told them, and they were like, yes. We had a person, a colleague who we did, you know, an event with, and she was like, I'm going home to Ghana, and I'm going to tell everyone in Ghana, you know, to start taking pictures of art, you know. So it's kind of like a grassroots for us, you know, kind of thing where it just person to person. And there's, you know, that's not the most efficient way, but there's power in that. And you know, we'll try to build, you know, some more you know, kind of more uh, broad ranging kind of ways of connecting with people and getting the word out. But right now, that's what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I'd like to add is that I've been doing very intensive grant writing, and for example, the some of the grants that I've been applying for, they actually they ask you, you know, to demonstrate your public engagement plan, and that made me really really have to think it through and write it out very much step by step. And you know, what they kind of like some of these grants, they sort of ask you to show how much of your budget you're going to use. And I was very shocked to find out, asking around other people who do similar projects, that a huge amount of budget can be apportioned for this, almost like more than the whole project itself, or 50% of that. And so that got me thinking, and then also thinking about, you know, collaborating with or partnering with social media and publicity companies that are owned and operated by minority communities or by people who are connected to the communities being served. So like, you know, in Detroit, looking at like Black owned social media companies and things like that. And so we're not at that stage yet where but we're kind of gearing up to that kind of thing. So also one grant that I applied to was very much asking you must identify your target audience, you know, and really rationalize why this is your specific target audience. And of course you want to reach other but if you want to reach everybody, you might end up reaching nobody. And so that made us think a lot about, okay, well, if we're representing inner city African American Muslims in Detroit and their civic engagement efforts, that our target audience became the larger Michigan Muslim community, the larger ethnically diverse Michigan Muslim community, including those in the suburbs and including those who are from, you know, communities and groups that traditionally come in with like, you know, perhaps more resources, you know. And there are already channels in place where the larger Michigan Muslim community does like a lot of philanthropy and shares resources as far as they know and are aware of, you know, other Muslim groups. And so this was a very natural target community. And so we're going to be gearing our publicity towards that large and robust like network of ethnically diverse Muslim or, you know, Muslim organizations and individuals in Michigan. And then from there, you know, be trying to target other, you know, parties that are could be interested in exactly what we're doing. And so other kinds of like, first of all, interfaith organizations and other faith-based organizations that are doing civic engagement, and then people who are interested in activism and, you know, looking at uneven development in cities. And so, you know, from there, we're sort of like widening out. And so it was very important to this specific grant agency that we identify non-academic and non-scholarly audiences that we were primarily reaching out to, because it's so much easier to reach out to academic audiences. And so, you know, even if you don't really, you know, that can happen secondarily. So I've had to do a bunch of thinking about it, and really grateful for the organization, which is actually what I'm talking about, the Whitting Foundation, that has made me has put me through these paces, you know, in very productive ways. And so that was very helpful for me.
Nancy, I was wondering, you know, the communities that you're working with, do you find yourself going out there and, you know, approaching folks, or, you know, kind of pitching their, you know, involvement, or are you finding that, you know, word's traveled and, you know, people are seeking out you to be able to participate in this larger initiative?
Yeah, I would say pre-COVID, it was very grassroots. It has been very grassroots, right? Like going to community events, contacting people through social media, building a relationship through social media. Our student workers um, manage, or they did manage all our social media accounts. And so they actually, you know, they know what's, you know, what engages people and what doesn't for the most part. And I think, you know, I think we focus, our target audience is everyone. It's very intergenerational and intersectional, the work that we do. And I think because of that, you know, more people are wanting to come to our events potentially, because we're not like, this is, you know, for example, this during COVID, we had somebody who really wanted to attend our events, and she had kids at home because, you know, we all were at home. This person had kids, and she was like, I don't want to interrupt the workshop. Is it okay? And I'm like, yeah, bring your kids. They should be involved in this. And so they all logged in, and it was like a parent and her 3 kids. And we're, you know, we're actually creating toolkits for adults, but also for kids. We just finished a kid archivist toolkit, and it's a little booklet for ages 1 through grades 1 through 5. And it's basically just introducing them to archives. What is an archive? What is in your archive? What do you have that's really special? I have an 8-year-old son, so I actually kind of used him as a guinea pig to kind of see what engaged him. And now he's like, I'm a community archivist. And so I think just talking to people, like that was mentioned already, right? Listening and, you know, centering people's needs is very important. And people, you know, once you start building that trust, people know that you're legit, that you're not going to take advantage, and that word of mouth is actually worth so much more than any social media campaign that you would ever create. Because if people don't trust you, you know, people after 10 years, people finally trust me, but do they trust my institution? Probably not. And so, you know, and it's not my job. I'm not getting paid to I'm getting paid to serve my communities, to serve our communities here in Arizona. I'm not getting paid to be that bridge between the university and the communities. That's where the university has to do their part and, you know, show that they can be trusted. And how are they showing that? By continuing our initiative and giving us permanent funding, right? And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff we can do, but some of the other stuff is out of our hands, and it actually has to be done by our institutions.
You mentioning, you know, kind of the archiving kit, like for kids. I'm trying to think back of when I even learned about, you know, what an archive is. But, you know, it's kind of a natural, you know, who are better storytellers or collectors than, you know, young children. So it's interesting to, you know, expose them early on to that, and you know, give them kind of that sensitivity as they move through life, you know, thinking in that way. So
And
we're oh, I'm sorry, please, Nancy, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say that I think for me the future is our kids, right? And in Arizona, it's 80 over 80 80, I believe it's 89%, over 89% of our current student population is BIPOC here in Arizona, and we have one of the worst school systems in the country, or underfunded. And so that just shows you, right, if we can reach our children at a young age and show them that their stories matter, that they matter, you know, what legacy can we leave behind if we empower our communities at such a young age? And you know, my kid's collecting all his artwork from school, and someday he's gonna really appreciate that when he becomes like a famous artist or something. But I definitely think that we need to start dehumanizing ourselves from a very young age, or humanizing ourselves, sorry.
It just, you know, it makes me think that a lot of the work that I'm, you know, trying to do now is just, you know, being a parent and wanting to see a better world and a better future, where these systems of power don't, you know, kind of aren't a tool of oppression and, you know, kind of set the tone. So, you know, thinking about, you know, working with kids in that regard really kind of sticks with me. So we have some comments here from Scott. He says, all of this is just fascinating and so important for the world. All of you are changing today what history is and how the future will write history in a much more truthful, accurate, and equitable way. And he says, thank you. So I think we are probably kind of coming to the end of our discussion tonight. And I would love, since, you know, we're, you know, we had a question about it, and, you know, what I'm really interested in is, you know, kind of getting this sort of work off the ground in our community, both on and off campus. So perhaps, you know, everybody would like to share, you know, a few thoughts of, you know, maybe words of wisdom or, you know, lessons learned that, you know, you would want to impart to others taking on these sorts of initiatives.
I I would just say, you know, like for us, don't be afraid to make mistakes, or don't let the fear of making mistakes stop you from trying. And you know, mistakes can be bad, and they, you know, people can get hurt by mistakes, but you have to be willing to try things, and if you make a mistake, make amends for it, you know, fix it somehow. And so if we were afraid of making a mistake, we would have never started this project. And we have made plenty of mistakes along the way, and it's just part of, you know, it's part of trying to do something.
I guess my advice would be quality rather than quantity. If you can, it's very difficult to collect material in a responsible and responsive way. Following, you know, like it's really important to have, you know, like a very specific protocol and that's agreed upon by all parties. And like other people were saying, like we're here for the communities that we're serving, not for these, you know, not for other agencies who may want to use it. So, you know, going very slowly, not being frustrated if you have to do multiple checks from multiple people. And if there's delays, that's just fine. Like, you know, and if you at first, like if you just produce a few pieces or a few things in a beautiful way, and then, you know, you set your protocol for it, I think having a few things done right is much more valuable than having a lot of things that aren't done correctly.
I'll just, sorry, I didn't know if you wanted to go next, Heather. Um, I would say that if you're a part of the BIPOC community, and you're wanting to do this work, it is a lot of emotional labor, a lot of emotional labor. So maybe set some boundaries for yourself before you start the work, you know, and then like think about what you want to do, really want to do, and think about potential partners that can help you get there. And you know what, sometimes it isn't a university, maybe it's a community organization or somebody else, and you start your own community archives right outside of academia, and that's perfectly okay, it's legitimate. And you know, I think I encourage people to dream big, right? Because if you dream big, you only come down, right? You have to like make modifications in order to like meet other to make the expectations less, right? But dream big. And I think that's why I've been able to be successful, is because from the beginning, I was like, this is what the community deserves. This is what I want to give to the community. And it took 10 years, but we're here and we're just going to keep growing. And if for some reason there is no more university funding, I'll have to come up with another idea or another solution, right? But at that point in time, I'm hoping that the community will have so much control that they might not need our participation or our involvement. And so I just, dream big, set boundaries, be gentle with yourself if things don't go right, and kind of like what the other panelist was saying, um, listen and just if you make a mistake, especially if you're a white person, don't let that make you stop doing this really important work. Because my project archivist for this grant was actually a white woman, and she's amazing. And the reason why she was very successful and people trusted her was because she listened. And if she made a mistake, people corrected her and felt safe enough to correct her and not feel like she was going to stop providing help or do something, right? And so I think that's very important too. We're all human. We're all going to make mistakes, but how do we fix those things? Fix the legacy of trauma, right? So
Yeah, thank you for that. I don't know that I have anything to add, because I think I really was going to say some of the same things Todd said about just not being afraid to throw yourself into it. And I think what you said too, Nancy, is so important about listening, and it's a constant skill to cultivate and learn working on these projects. I mean, especially as a white person coming to this project, I think about that a lot, how to listen and learn and step back. So I think that's really important as well. I just think about how in the beginning, Todd and I always kind of joke about how we had 1 or 2 photographs and we're like, there we go, we have an archive, and we just put it out there. And I'm glad we did it, even though I think we've had to do a lot of learning and listening and undoing along the way. And having developing systems, that's something that's happened over the course of time, and they're still in constant revision. But I'm glad that we did it. And I'm happy to have the chance to constantly try to make it better. It feels like there's always a lot of growth, and I'm thankful for that. And I'm just really glad to get all these ideas from all of you. So thanks for having us here tonight.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. You have many thank yous and wonderful compliments and insightful comments in the chat that everybody should check out. So it was a great honor. I think one of the things that definitely can be missing in the world we live in now, having to do everything via Zoom, is kind of those back and forth conversations. And I'm glad that even though it's not always so. It's not seamless. We've learned in WebEx, but I'm glad that it's this kind of has broken down barriers where we are able to bring experts from kind of all over to come together and kind of bounce ideas off of each other and share their expertise. So thank you everybody for joining us tonight, and a huge thank you and round of applause for our wonderful panelists that have been wonderful additions and to make this capturing community, this idea that we came up with kind of late in the summer, to bring it to life. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody. Have a good night.
Goodbye. Thank you.